The judge dismissed Mark Green's evidence with disdain, calling his attempts empty rhetoric. But when it was revealed that Mark was a nominee for the Supreme Court, his fight transformed into a battle against a system entrenched in bias. His next move would surprise even the most experienced observers. Let's start from the beginning. Mark Green stood at the entrance of the Springville District Court, holding a briefcase of documents. His clients, the Jenkins family, were waiting for the hearing to begin. The three children sat on a bench beside their parents, their faces reflecting the exhaustion of their fight for justice. They had been evicted from their home after the management company forged documents to get rid of problem tenants. "Everything will be okay," Mark reassured the mother as he leaned closer. "We will prove that their actions were illegal." In the courthouse corridor, Judge Garrett Rains passed by. A tall man with graying temples, he always carried himself with an air of detachment and cold authority. Today, he caught the attention of reporters asking about the upcoming case. "Judge Rains, what's your take on the Jenkins case?" one of them asked. Rains cast a fleeting glance at Mark and replied, "Cases like these rarely have any real merit. They're usually just attempts to delay the inevitable." Mark overheard the remark, feeling indignation rise within him, but he knew personal emotions wouldn't serve him in court. The courtroom was packed. Mark began presenting his arguments. He displayed evidence of forged documents, brought in expert testimonies, and cited relevant laws. But before he could finish, Rains interrupted him. "Green, you understand the court's time is valuable, don't you? Your theory is, to put it mildly, far-fetched." Some spectators exchanged surprised glances. The tension in the room was palpable. Maintaining his composure, Mark replied, "Your Honor, if you allow me to finish, I'll present facts that substantiate every word I've said." Rains waved dismissively, gesturing for him to continue, but his expression showed irritation. After the hearing, Mark saw the judge in the hallway. Rains was speaking with his assistant, oblivious to Mark standing just around the corner. "These guys like Green just complicate things," Rains said dismissively. "They come in here acting like they know better than us how the law works." Mark clenched his jaw but decided not to intervene. He was ready for a fight, but that day revealed just how deeply rooted the bias ran. By evening, tensions had escalated. A journalist who had attended the hearing published an article about Judge Rains's treatment of Mark and the case. The piece spread quickly on social media, with the judge's dismissive remarks sparking public outrage. As Mark drove home, his phone buzzed with a message from an old friend. "Have you seen the news? Brace yourself. Tomorrow's going to be a storm." Mark looked out of the car window, his reflection in the glass appearing both weary and determined. He had no idea that this case would soon transform not just his career, but the justice system itself. The next day, the Springville courtroom was packed to the brim. Tension hung in the air, and cameras tracked every movement. Mark Green, dressed sharply and carrying a folder of documents, walked into the courtroom. This time his steps were more assured, undeterred by Judge Rains's previous humiliating comments. "Mr. Green, you may proceed," Rains said coldly, tapping his pen on the desk. Mark nodded and began. "Your Honor, as you can see, these documents bear forged tenant signatures. Here are the accounting records showing that the management company inflated rental payments to force the Jenkins family out. This is a clear violation of the law." Rains glanced briefly at the papers, then folded his arms. "These documents could have been fabricated by anyone. Do you have anything more compelling than mere speculation?" The courtroom fell silent. Even those unfamiliar with the law could sense the blatant unfairness. Among the spectators, journalist Jessica Hall whispered to her cameraman, "This is crossing the line. We need to follow this closely." Keeping his composure, Mark responded, "Your Honor, these documents have been certified by independent experts. I ask that you give them the consideration they deserve." Rains curled his lip and waved for Mark to continue, but it was clear his decision had already been made. After the session, Mark stepped outside, greeted by a swarm of reporters. Camera flashes lit up the scene as questions flew from all directions. "Mr. Green, how do you respond to the judge's behavior? Do you think he's biased?" Raising his hand for silence, Mark replied, "My role is to defend the rights of people like the Jenkins family. My faith in justice remains unshaken." With that, he stepped into his car. Meanwhile, Rains was in his office, venting to a colleague. "That green guy is just looking for publicity," he muttered, pouring himself coffee. "They're trying to paint me as the bad guy, but I know how to run a courtroom." "Do you think this will blow over?" his assistant asked. "Of course, a few days, and everyone will forget this case," Rains scoffed. But he was wrong. By evening, a full-blown scandal had erupted on social media. Videos of Mark presenting his evidence, only for Rains to dismiss it, went viral. The hashtag Judge Rains trended nationwide, with thousands of comments. How can someone preside over cases when they don't even listen to both sides? The Jenkins family deserves justice. Green is a true hero. Our judicial system is broken. This needs to change. At home, Mark checked his phone. Calls and messages poured in from colleagues, family, and journalists. One message stood out. It was from an old friend who now worked at the White House. "Congratulations, Mark. The president just announced you as a Supreme Court nominee. Everything changes tomorrow." Mark read the message multiple times, taking a moment to process what had happened. The next morning, the headlines blared, "Black attorney Mark Green nominated to the Supreme Court. Justice for all. How the Jenkins case exposed judicial bias." But along with the support came new pressure. The courthouse was abuzz with activity. Journalists, bloggers, and activists crowded the entrance, debating Mark's Supreme Court nomination. Mark stepped out of his car, looking tired, yet composed. Reporters fired questions at him. "Do you think Judge Rains is biased?" "I'm here for truth, not arguments," Mark replied calmly as he entered. Inside, the tension was thicker than ever. Rains struggled to maintain his composure, but his trembling hands betrayed his fear. Mark presented further evidence, calling in experts who confirmed the management company's fraudulent practices. "Why do these mistakes always seem to affect black families?" Mark asked sharply, his voice reverberating in the silent courtroom. Rains avoided a direct response, but his authority was eroding. Comments from spectators increased the pressure, and social media was alight with discussions of his bias. On the final day of the hearing, the courthouse was overflowing. People packed the courtroom, and large crowds gathered outside, chanting slogans in support of Mark Green and the Jenkins family. Banners reading, "Justice for all," and "The system must serve the people," waved in the breeze. Inside, an electrifying tension hung in the air. Judge Rains entered the courtroom later than usual. His steps lacked confidence, and his gaze darted nervously around, avoiding the crowd's expectant stares. The pressure that had been mounting over the course of the trial weighed heavily on him. Mark stood to deliver his closing argument. His voice was calm, but each word carried an undeniable force. "Your Honor, members of the court," he began, looking directly at Judge Rains. "The Jenkins case is about more than one family. It's about trust in our justice system. If we allow corporations to falsify documents, break the law, and destroy lives, what becomes of the principles of fairness and justice?" He paused, allowing his words to resonate in the room. Then, with quiet determination, he added, "Today, you have the chance to show that the law is not just words on a page, but a shield that protects every citizen, regardless of their race, status, or income." The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to Judge Rains, who frowned, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. After a long pause, he finally stood. "The court will recess to deliberate," he announced tersely, leaving the room. The wait stretched on for an hour, each minute thick with anticipation. When Judge Rains returned, the courtroom was so quiet that every footstep echoed. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and cleared his throat. "After careful review of all the evidence, this court finds that the management company acted unlawfully. The Jenkins family is to be reinstated in their home and compensated for damages." The courtroom erupted in applause. The Jenkins family embraced, tears streaming down their faces. Mark allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, though his expression remained composed. Internally, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Judge Raines, however, wasn't done. He hesitated, then looked up at Mark. "Mr. Green," he began, his voice subdued, "I acknowledge that my actions during this case may have appeared biased. This has been a humbling lesson for me as a judge and as a person." The judge's words elicited mixed reactions. Some in the audience believed them to be sincere, while others saw them as a mere attempt to save face. After the verdict, outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Mark. Camera flashes lit the scene as questions bombarded him from every direction. "Mr. Green, what do you think about not only your victory, but also the judge's admission?" asked Jessica Hall, one of the leading journalists covering the case. "This victory belongs to the Jenkins family and everyone who believes in fairness and justice," Mark replied firmly. "As for the judge, I hope this case serves as a reminder to us all of the importance of fighting for equality under the law." That evening, news outlets buzzed with headlines. "Mark Green wins justice for the Jenkins family. Judge Raines admits mistakes in landmark case." The aftermath. A few days later, the story took an even more extraordinary turn. During a primetime broadcast, the president formally announced Mark Green's nomination to the Supreme Court. "This is a man who doesn't just talk about justice, he fights for it," the president said. "His integrity, courage, and unwavering commitment to fairness make him a worthy candidate for the highest court in the land." The announcement ignited celebrations across the country. The Jenkins family returned to their home. Activists dispersed, and the city seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Yet the deeper lessons lingered. Mark Green's journey became a symbol of perseverance in the face of systemic bias and injustice. His fight wasn't just about one case. It was about challenging the very structures that allowed such injustices to persist. A new chapter. Back in his office, Mark's phone buzzed. On the other end was one of his old mentors, a retired attorney who had guided him early in his career. "You've achieved something incredible, Mark," the voice said. "But remember, this is just the beginning. Now, you have the responsibility to prove that truth is stronger than prejudice, and that justice is for everyone." Mark glanced at the photograph of his family on his desk. It reminded him of why he had chosen this path and the values he held dear. He picked up the phone, his voice steady and resolved. "That's exactly what I intend to do," he replied. As the call ended, Mark sat back, reflecting on the battle he had just won. It was only one of many, but he knew it had sparked a movement. His nomination to the Supreme Court marked the beginning of a new era, not just for him, but for the entire legal system. For Mark Green, the fight for justice had just begun.